April the 25th, 1915, men of the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps landed at Gallipoli. It was on that day the traditions of our fighting forces were born. These stories of their sons and daughters at war we proudly dedicate to the memory of Zach. New Zealanders had joined with Australians to found the proud tradition of ANZ. Between the wars, they turned to happier things. Like the Australians, they were a peace-loving people. But in 1939, the ways of peace are suddenly things of the past for New Zealand. All over the country, volunteers spring to arms. Pakihas and Maoris, white and brown, they crowd the training camps to learn the terrible skills of war. They are trained in the brutal tricks of unarmed combat. They learn about the new wonder weapon from Czechoslovakia, the Bren gun. They are taught the mysteries of another new infantry weapon, the deadly Tommy gun. Gas, the terror weapon of the Kaiser's war, may be used against them again. There are 1,000 new things to learn and master. Above all, the soldier has to be fit and tough. He has to endure and march as well as fight. Once it was the New Zealand Mounted Rifles. Now the glamour arm is the Air Force. Meanwhile, in the grim atmosphere of war, New Zealand celebrates her centenary. The Governor-General, Viscount Galway, inspects a ceremonial guard. New Zealand's early echelons are ready to go abroad. Men march through Wellington to the embarkation wharves and the waiting transports. Among them, men of the Maori battalion. A Maori father farewells his son in traditional fashion, and a Maori mother says goodbye. Kit bags are taken on board. Cedric Salmon and Bill Innes, movement control officers, check the men aboard. For most of them, it's the first time they've set foot on a ship. Not only the Army, the Air Force too is off to war. Moving there. There are tears behind many women's smiles. Pick up your feet, you idlers. They don't know where they're bound. Their destinations are closely guarded military secret. They only know they're setting off on the greatest adventure of all. And that will be a long time before they see home and loved ones again. They leave to the haunting strains of Hari Ra, the Maori farewell. It was to Mahdi, Egypt, they went, where training begins again. Mail from home, the soldier's greatest joy. Local leave gives opportunities to see the sights, visit the town. What Kiwi a few months before would in his wildest dreams have thought he would be spending his leave standing on the slopes of Mount Scopus, gazing out over Jerusalem. Jerusalem the Golden, whose every stone is heavy with history. Here was a city holy to three great faiths. Here Christ faced his accusers. Here, stamped in the living rock, Muslims show the hoof mark of Muhammad's steed as he quitted this earth. Here King David built his royal city. Nor has the scene changed much with the centuries, for still they plough the land as they ploughed it in the time of David. and still they haggle in the marketplace. In its long history, Jerusalem has seen much of war and known many soldiers from many lands. An earlier generation of New Zealanders, who had ridden down the Turkish armies with Allenby, had walked its narrow streets. Today their sons, their battles yet to be fought, see the same sights. This is the Wailing Wall of the Jews, in the Old City. On the other side of the River Jordan, the Kiwis see the cameleers of Transjordan's famed Arab Legion, and chat with King Abdullah of Transjordan. Desert horsemen of the Legion ride by, while King Abdullah talks of war as he had waged it in his fiery youth. But war seems very far from the Mount of Olives and the Garden of Gethsemane. This was the Holy Land, rich in tradition and hallowed by faith, a place of pilgrimage for centuries, where the young soldiers of New Zealand made their final preparations for the war, now mounting into fury round the Mediterranean coasts, a war which many men called a crusade. And back to Egypt come the survivors of the New Zealand Division, which as part of the Anzac Corps has won imperishable glory in Greece and Crete. More and more reinforcements are needed, and more volunteers sail for the Middle East, for there are big gaps in the ranks of the gallant division. A third of its men have been left behind on battlefields and beaches. And now New Zealand herself is in danger. Japan is on the march. With the flower of New Zealand manhood abroad, those left behind, men and women, rally to the defense of the homeland. The threat of Japanese air attack grows. Young and old all take part in air raid rehearsals, while preparations to repel invasion go on feverishly. With menfolk away, the women of New Zealand take over many of their jobs. Total war means total mobilization, and everyone shares the burdens. But help is at hand. To New Zealand, as to Australia, comes an ever-mounting flow of American troops. To Canada, New Zealand still sends her Empire Air trainees, despite her own time of peril. From Canada, they go to Britain to take their part in the air war in Europe's embattled skies. They had fought in the Battle of Britain. Now they are carrying the Blitz to Germany. These dramatic pictures, taken from a New Zealand bomber, show what an air attack into the heart of the Ruhr meant. Meanwhile, in Egypt, the New Zealand Division is preparing for its greatest battle and its greatest victory. The date is October 23, 1942. Alamein. With Rommel's army routed at Alamein, the 8th Army begins one of the greatest chases in military history across some 2,000 miles of desert. First of the pursuers snapping at the enemy's heels are the victorious Kiwis. Rommel is given no respite. The desert road is littered with the grim debris of the enemy's defeat. going is rough. Enemy demolitions mean that roads have to be hacked across rocky escarpments, through steep waddings. There's no 40-hour week for the Kiwi sappers. But the way is cleared and the trucks roll on. General Freiberg, BC, the New Zealand commander, directs operations against enemy rearguards. These are quickly brushed aside, for German and Italian morale is at a low ebb. Forward once again. The New Zealanders enter the town of Takruna, only 40 miles from Tripoli. A column of prisoners marches to the rear. On the approaches to Tripoli, a German panzer division makes a last stand. The New Zealanders blast their way through. The advance goes on with Tripoli, Italy's colonial capital, its goal. Men of the Mari Battalion take the lead on the last lap. Libyans, delighted to be free from fascist Italian tyranny and brutality, welcome the Kiwis as liberators. At last, in the early hours of January the 23rd, 1943, after a fighting advance of 1,400 miles, the New Zealanders enter Tripoli, the prize which had so long eluded the Desert Army. Egypt and a well-earned rest. Race meetings are popular. More fun this than the Benghazi derby. Some prefer the Mediterranean beaches. The men of the early echelons who have served abroad for 3.5 years are given leave at home, but many will never return. In the meantime, the Americans have met and held the Japanese in the bloody battles for Guadalcanal, and New Zealand is freed from the fear of invasion. Despite her commitments in the Mediterranean, New Zealand is playing her full part in the Pacific War. Regularly, her planes take off to blast Japanese island bases. New Zealand soldiers are now fighting on two main fronts, 10,000 miles apart. Freiberg's 2nd Division crosses from North Africa to take its part in the tough campaign in Italy. It's not long before the Kiwis once again cover themselves with glory in the hell of Cassina. Snow and mud and bitter cold, and a tough, skillful, fanatical enemy. Meanwhile, New Zealand's 3rd Division is training on Guadalcanal for a very different war in jungle and tropic heat. But there's mud in the Pacific too, and the enemy is no less fanatical than the Germans. Their training completed, the men of the 3rd Division land and seize Bella Lavella, Treasury Island, and Nissa. Italy, their comrades are fighting their way north, the main German resistance now broken. This was their welcome in Florence. demolitions slow their advance, but they press on to Faenza. And on again to Monfalcone on the Adriatic. There's a historic moment here when General Freiberg greets the young commander of a Yugoslav corps which has been fighting its way around the head of the Adriatic. But there's history still to be made and an enemy still to be finally beaten. And the New Zealand veterans leave the brief hospitality of Monfalcone and push on towards the goal which has been assigned to them, the famous city and port of Trieste. Up the Adriatic coast they forge ahead, through village after village, town after town. It's their last advance in the war. To communist partisans, Tito is the savior, but Freiberg is the man on the spot. At last, Trieste, and the first portents of political breakers ahead. Signs in Serbian and Italian stating the Yugoslav claim on this frontier between communist and non-communist Europe. But the Kiwis can scribble on walls too. If Tito, why not the New Zealand Prime Minister? The tension builds up. The Yugoslavs march in reinforcements. They are determined to make their claim to Trieste stick. The Western Allies are equally determined they shall not. And here the New Zealanders represent the West. It's a ticklish situation. German officers prefer to surrender to the Kiwis. Through the uneasy streets of Trieste clatter New Zealand tanks. Bands of armed Yugoslav guerrillas march confidently through the city they claim as their own. In this brittle atmosphere, the sentries outside a New Zealand headquarters are not there for show. Nor are the communist guards who face them across a street dividing two worlds. The Maorilanders maintain constant armed patrols. On street corners, their tanks mount guard against a possible coup by their Yugoslav allies. Tough and seasoned fighters carrying captured German weapons, the Yugoslavs patrol too. A situation has built up in which even a small incident could touch off a major tragedy. The people of Trieste know that their fate hangs in the balance. They watch and wonder. But the Kiwis show that they know how to win a war of nerves. For when the nerve war ends, it's the New Zealand flag which still flies above the castle of the Duke of Aosta. And now there are thoughts of hope. They've won their last victory in Europe, not by arms, but by discipline and self-control. There's time to think again of the tasks of peace. The day the whole free world has long waited for is celebrated in New Zealand. But the war in the Pacific has still to be won. Warships still face action, and so do the planes of the Royal New Zealand Air Force. Meanwhile, United States Marines are at action stations to the north, and New Zealand Air Forcemen have to hold their advanced bases in the islands. They service their planes in exposed and dangerous positions. But every plane must be kept tuned to fighting pitch, whatever the conditions. A shovel is sometimes the fighting man's best friend. After getting its deadly load aboard, a Royal New Zealand Air Force torpedo bomber takes off. The raiders form up. The target for today is Rabaul, already shattered by air attack, but still housing supply and ammunition dumps, and with Japanese airstrips still operating. Bombs away. Operation completed. Back to base. Maori's kinsmen crowd Pipitea Wharf in Wellington to welcome home the men of the battalion returning on the Dominion Monarch. The battalion have covered themselves with honor in the hardest fighting in the Mediterranean. Leading Maori, Mr. Tirikatini, is there to greet the most welcome war canoe of all time. They march through city streets. They face the traditional challenge. Do they come in peace, the grass-skirted, spear-shaking challenger demands? Yes, at last, after the long, bitter years of war, the survivors of the gallant battalion can truly say they come in peace. Home once again to the familiar, long-remembered sights of their native soil. Their women honor them with the traditional dancing. Arrangements for this welcome were made by the Maori War Efforts Organization, with the Maori people sharing the cost. The women sing and dance to the old war god, whose protection now is no longer required. A welcome home ceremony would be a poor affair without a hangi, or Maori feast. A mountain of food is prepared and cooked in pits in the old tribal way. The Maoris are grand fighters, and they're grand eaters too. This is to be a feast to remember. All over New Zealand, the scenes of welcome are repeated as the men of the battalion disperse to their home communities. Sadness mingles with joy as their womenfolk greet them, waving the ferns and leaves which signify mourning for those who have not come home. The customary challenges are repeated and the responses given. High dignitaries welcome the returning warriors. Old women and old men greet the young men of their tribe by rubbing noses in the old Maori way. They mourn their loved ones who will never return. And now the war in the Pacific is over too. The lean, grim years of death and hardship and bitter anxieties lie behind. The challenging future opens ahead. The New Zealanders respond to the challenge of peace with the same energy and resolution and courage which ranked them among the finest troops in the war. Swords have to be beaten into plowshares. A wartime economy has to be re-geared to the needs of peace. Men whose trade for 5 years has been death must relearn old skills and acquire new ones. For their sons and daughters, they have saved the priceless heritage of freedom.